Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description. Check it out right now.
All right, check this out. Jason Verrett, back to the 49ers, John. Rap Sheet tweeted this. Verrett had a multi-year offer on the table, but he opted to bet on himself again. He shined when healthy. A 1-year, $5.5 million contract with the 49ers that can be $6.5 million if he makes the Pro Bowl. A solid deal. So hoping to have another good year, and then maybe the next year maybe gets a little more money if the cap goes back up, as opposed to a multi-year deal with somebody that presumably was not for much more than $5.5 million.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there was a little loyalty to the Niners in the sense of 2 years ago when he first came here, he got hurt, missed the entire season, basically played in one game. They stuck by him. He got to play a lot this year because of injuries and was good. I just wonder if he goes, I'm on a pretty good team. If the money is relatively close, they feel comfortable with me. Because he's kind of a unique case. You and I have talked the last couple of days about all these guys want to do 1-year deals. Like, I would say he's the opposite of most of those guys just because he's had a plethora of injuries. I mean, he had a stretch for 4 years. 1 year, I think it was 18, he did not play. It was his game logs just don't even exist. He did not exist. Like, he didn't play because he ripped up his whole lower body. And then previously 4 games, 1 game. The first year with the Niners, 1 game. You know, he was not a number one overall pick, but a first-round pick once upon a time for a reason. He was a twitchy, explosive athlete. I remember being at a Raider game when he picked off Derek, that second big year that he had, and he looked like an up-and-coming star. And I just think that the Niners, for a value position, they basically have their corners, their 2 starting corners right now, on paper at least. You never know with the draft. They could draft a corner relatively high. It'll cost around $10 million. So of a $185 million cap, give or take. I know their cap numbers might be a little different, but what they gave Mosley 2 years, $10 million, and they gave this guy basically 1 year, $5 million. So I think it's fair to say, give or take, around that $9-10 million range for the 2 guys. You feel pretty good. Ideally, I say this all the time. Most teams, because when the Niners were really good the year they went to the Super Bowl, Sherman was an all-pro. And the other cornerback, right, was just Akello. People were down on him. 3rd-round pick, never lived up to it. But he was really gifted. Mosley, undrafted free agent, came in that year and played really good. But people are always like, why don't we have a second corner? Most teams, like the great teams, LOB had 1 corner. And then they just rotated the other corners, right, through the years. It was Brandon Browner. It was just other guys. You don't get like, we got Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis. Like, that's just my team building philosophy, and I feel really strongly about this, is I'm okay with having, on paper, quote unquote, average corners. You gotta have, I believe in safeties, and the Niners have pretty solid safeties, but average corners, elite defensive line. And I think it's fair to say that Kyle, from his team building standpoint, and John believe in that too.
I think yes, it's absolutely fair to say. If you said, what do they think most, what position do they prioritize the most, I would say defensive line.
Yeah. That doesn't mean they're always right. They take some misses, but I will never fault anyone. Even the Raiders, when they took Cleveland Farrell, I do appreciate the Niners did it with Solomon Thomas. If I'm going to strike out, I'm going to strike out swinging at those pitches, right? Yeah, it's like, God, I had a busted corner. Or remember A.J. Jenkins? Oh, it's like, oh, my God. It's like, okay, Kinlaw. I do think don't you think for a lot of these guys, their floors are a little higher? Like, Solomon Thomas was not the 3rd overall pick, clearly, like his value. But he was playable, and like he played on Super Bowl team.
But that's the same thing we give Mike Mayock a hard time for. Like, that's fine at 25, but not at 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah, but my point is their team isn't very good. If Cleveland Farrell was on a really good team, I think you could live with it. Yeah, because defensive linemen can play.
Well, that's where you get to McGlinchey. Like, is McGlinchey a solid offensive lineman, or are you going to have to replace him? Are you not going to be able to pick up his 5th-year option? Because I'll say this. We're talking about Verrett, to the 28th, the McGlinchey draft. I don't want to put an if in here, but if the Niners had held on to DJ Reed, they would have drafted in 2018 Tarvarius Moore, DJ Reed, Marcel Harris, and then signed Emmanuel Mosley as an undrafted free agent. 2018, even without DJ Reed, was to give an undrafted free agent a contract after 3 years on your team, which is what they did to make Emmanuel Mosley a starting corner, is pretty impressive, right? That's a good pickup. Emmanuel Mosley was undrafted out of Tennessee, and then they practice squatted him.
Yeah, you get credit. I say this all the time in a draft for undrafted free agents, right? Emmanuel Mosley, Matt Breida, like you do get credit for those guys in a draft class.
Yeah.
And DJ Reed does start for the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh, I know you get that, but it hurts.
It does. Yeah.
That one hurts. But yeah, I think part of the question here is like, okay, so corners, they have starting corners. You need more than 2 corners, and particularly, I would have re-signed Jason Verrett just given how hard it is to get corners, given how expensive they can be at the top end of the market, and given that he was good for you last year. And I could understand if you just had him on your team last year, you go, look, I know what the resume was for 4 years before we signed him, and the 1 year, I guess 1 year included, where he basically was a rehab year on the team. But we just watched him up close. We saw him take some big hits. We saw him involved in some big plays. We saw him limp off the field, and he bounced back. So we believe in his durability after last year. I would still want another cornerback. Now, maybe that means in the draft, but they're not done, but I do think
I might take 2.
Okay, but at least it's like on the top end of your board, you go, okay, we don't have to. The next thing we can do can be our next big priority, right? Which could be offensive line, defensive line, whatever. Like we can move off of corner for a little bit now. We got 2 starting cornerbacks.
I agree. And like I said, you just need functional corners. You need functional corners, and they got functional corners. They do not have a Pro Bowler. They do not have anyone that's worth huge money, clearly. But they got 2 functional corners. Now, Verrett, you need reinforcements because he gets hurt. Like you can't bank. It would be the upset city if he played in 16 games. To me, if you got like 12 to 14
he played
out
13
of him,
last year.
Yeah, you take 13 right now. But I think they're going to be in the draft. Obviously, you got to take one. They become a valued place for an undrafted free agent. They're probably going to lose K'Wan Williams, who my guess would be he ends up with the Jets. That is a very, very vital position that he played, right? Because he was a double whammy. Fantastic nickel corner. Sneaky, unreal blitzer. Like and I remember learning this in the NFL, and it actually was kind of hit or miss, a decade ago. But the last 3 or 4 years with spread offenses, your nickel corner is an extra linebacker. So teams, like when you play the Peyton Manning, he will check to a run and run it right at his ass. Well, K'Wan was a physical motherfucker. So it was like, okay, take it on. And that's why the Niners were so good on run defense, because their corners, including Richard, were hit like linebackers. You lose Richard hit like he was a safety or a linebacker. K'Wan played like he was a safety or a linebacker. To me, these guys more true corners. There's nothing wrong with that. Dion once famously said, I don't get paid to tackle, because they really don't. They get paid to cover. But as the league spreads out, right, these quarterbacks and these check with me offenses and these audibles, what do? I'm running it at those guys. What does Kyle do all the time? You can tell within the first 5 plays of a Kyle game, he's like, he thinks the corners are soft. He thinks they don't have outside contain because he'll run sweep.
Because here comes Debo 4 times around the edge.
Yeah, and he'll just pound you there. That's where I do think the Niners. Like, I'm just prepared for the Niners to not be as physical of a defense as they've been. Because the one thing, even this year when they weren't quite as good as they were the year before, it felt like they were like, oh, my God, you better buckle your chin strap to pay these guys,
yeah, I mean,
right? And they're DBs. Jimmy Ward, K'Wan, Richard, it was like guys were getting blasted.
That might be the characteristic of all your mid to late round guys is physicality.
Mosley hits. I'll give him that. Mosley's a physical corner. But Verrett's more of a true cover, twitchy guy.
What you need, what you need, which is fine, John. If physicality, if the cover skill is the one that gets you drafted in the first round, so 100%. The physicality you can find a little later in the draft in the secondary, right?
Well, that's Richard. Richard was a 5th round pick.
Yeah. All right.
Can the Niners find Richard Sherman in the 5th round?
I mean, is there? Yeah, no.
I think the Niners would.
Unlikely.
I think it's fair to say with one of their first 3 picks, they're going to take a DB. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the question is, are you going to do it with your first one? Because that's where we've talked about it. You don't love corners that high.
I think your second day pick.
Yeah, or
second or third.
Do you somehow end up back in the first round because you love a corner?
Corner's really high or risky.
Well, the fact that it feels like they just what they just did would tell you they're probably not doing that with Mosley and Verrett. You don't pay 2 corners. Not that you gave them exorbitant salaries, but you don't get 2 guys and then.
Well, okay.
Although you do kind of start thinking big picture.
I love Ahkello Weatherspoons. Now, he didn't turn into what I think you wanted, but it doesn't hurt that much. You're like, why don't you just use a 3rd round pick on him? It was worth the risk. He got to play a little bit. And he just didn't pan out.
Yeah.
I'll do that all day long. Take Ahkello Weatherspoon. Obviously, you're trying to get the better version of that. But
what he
I
was
like
was
those type guys in third round.
Sorry, what he was a classic Seattle body type, right? Long, and we've seen it. Seattle keeps drafting these guys, and you don't have to draft him in the first round.
Right. Wasn't the knock on him too? He wasn't that physical.
Yeah. But they drafted the length and the size.
What would Akello been if he was actually physical with those
first
athletic
round?
attributes?
I mean, yeah. Right?
Yeah.